Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today I'm joined by Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp to review Makoto Shinkai's Weathering with You to wrap up my birthday celebration of episodes. The film follows a young boy named Hodoka who runs away from his family town to make it in Tokyo. He runs away, he gets a little job, and he ends up meeting this girl around his age who seemingly has the magical power to control the weather. Tokyo has been just constantly raining and storms, and she has the power to create small moments of sunshine, and together they go on their own little journey. To be honest, I don't really want to spoil much of this one. In fact, half the episode today is going to be a spoiler-free review. This is definitely a film that's worthwhile to check out, completely unspoiled, so definitely go check the film out. You can still stick around for our spoiler-free review portion either way, but then we are going to get fully into spoiler review territory, because this is, spoiler alert, a very good film. There's a lot here to break down. It is a very ambitious feature from Makoto Shinkai, and personally, I would say easily it is his best. Thank you so much for joining us for another week of ClapperCast. Now let's get to our review of Weathering with You.
Okay, Jack, thank you so much for joining me for week 2 of my birthday month. We're checking out Makoto Shinkai's Weathering with You. I'm very excited for this, but I also know that you are a massive anime fan, so I'm happy that you're here joining me on the trenches for this. I'll start out quickly because this is my birthday episode. I'm not a big Makoto Shinkai fan. I've checked out now all of his works, but I'm not really overly into Your Name, not really overly into Suzume. None of his works really grab me. But I remember this film, I was working at the theater at the time, and it was playing for like a week straight, and every single time it was like sold out, crazy busy. So I was like, oh, I'll just go check it out. Why not? And it's a film I'm quite blown away by, even still revisiting it. There's so much here to unpack. And I know we just said that with the Paul Schrader episode, but truly here, it feels like this is such an ambitious feature, not just in the amount of content it's covering, but also in some of the messages and some of the takes. I don't like Makoto Shinkai as a filmmaker, as far as the work he produces, but I have endless respect for the guy. Imagining having the biggest film of your career, one of the biggest films of all time, and then turning around and making this for so many reasons we'll get into, I think is like such a baller move and really speaks to him as a person and as a filmmaker. So endless respect there. But I really like this film. I guess I'll just very casually open it with that. Jack, again, being the massive anime stan you are, what are your opening thoughts on Weathering with You?
Yeah, Carson's being sarcastic there, everyone. I'm not the biggest viewer of anime. I'm not into the One Punch. I don't watch Dragon Ball, all that sort of shit. I'm not. It just isn't type of my culture. It's nothing I've been drawn into. I've never really had access to it, even as a kid. Like the only animation I've ever really wanted is like Ninja Turtles, Scooby Doo, that sort of stuff. So I'm way off. I don't actively go out and watch these in the cinema either. I miss the Miyazaki stuff because they don't get very good screenings here. Mostly it's dubbed, which is quite fun anyway because you get a really good cast list and it's just nothing I can really find, and it's quite expensive to buy Ghibli here. Like I think we mentioned this on the ironically probably the last anime film I watched of this type of theme is Grave of the Fireflies, which was God, it's like about a year ago now, isn't it? Probably it was last summer.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
About a year.
Which was a tremendous episode. Everyone go about Miyu and Hillary. It was terrific to watch that and be like slightly blown away. And I have the same response to this as I did with that, in a way that I find the craft and the thematic a bit of a dissonance. So I go into this probably narrow-minded wise, with a level of naivete, thinking that, well, it's anime, it's going to be quite pleasant and placid. And I go into it and it's like, oh God, this is quite heavy. Not heavy in a way that it's like, oh, jarring. It's just, it takes me a while to get around. And my Miyazaki stuff is like Ponyo, which is equally similar to this in a sense of a similar theme. So go back into the past, 2019, I think the 26th of January, which is literally, I think I watched this in 2 screenings and COVID happened. I'm sure it was, or maybe it was a year before. I can't remember where I watched this. It would have been in Manchester. It would have been me working at a job in a cinema, which I'll have to tell people off air. I can't do that on air. And I remember watching into this and walking into it and be like, oh, okay, just anime, it's 2 hours. Like, I'll just let's just see what it's like. And I remember coming out of it like, it's very heavy, very heavy. It felt like a Miyazaki feature, but with a very much darker, not like subdued thematic, but like very much on the nose. And interestingly enough, I haven't thought about this in 6 years. There was no reason why I bring it up. And then you announced it on the podcast, like, oh, like I'll do. I like talking to cast my anything anyway, so be like, my Sunday night's fine. And I watched it, and I had the exact same feeling. Like I went into it not remembering what it was about, and be like, oh, this is Heather, this is Heather. And I come across, I really like this as well. I do think that some of it's a little bit undercooked, and some of it's like, oh, this is a shift. Like we're definitely trying to talk about really strong themes here. But unlike you, I haven't seen the filmography growth here. I haven't seen an evolution. If I'm not mistaken, I've seen some reviews on Letterboxd, and you're quite you've got a bit of like a yo-yo with this guy as well, haven't you? Like you've like 5, then a 2, then a 3. Like you're very, very, because I didn't expect that. So I'm very interested to know how this stands out. But I wouldn't be able to look at this in a Miyazaki film and differentiate. I'm just not that glued into it. Artistically, I probably would be able to with the Ghibli sense of style, but I think this to me just slots in, and I'm like, oh, okay. But it's very much very very profound, very poignant, very adult. Even now, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Like the very very like very quite strong stuff. But I enjoyed it. I just it's just not a thing for me, and but I appreciate the artistic merit here. And there's somewhat like of if anything, there's a major appreciation for what this person's like tried to craft here, because it very much is like this romanticized melancholy approach, and then underlying there, like this is very very dark, very very dark. And I think if you watch this at probably the right age, which there'd be probably a discussion in its own right. I don't know what age you would gravitate towards this. It's quite dark, but I think this is quite opening. I think it's quite opening about gender dynamics. I think about in Japan's social hierarchy as well, which is it's interesting because I don't know if viewers know this. I visited Japan not long before this, and the last day was a thunderstorm, and it was it was really humid weather for about 5-6 days. I went with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, just for the clarification there. And it was very very humid, very strange weather. And the last day we were there, it was just thunderstorms, and in a very melancholy way. It really reminded me of that journey. It was really nice to watch. It was just very strange, like being back in 2018, 2019. It was a nice one. But I'll throw it to you to where this stands out. But I enjoyed this. But I haven't seen any of this director's stuff, and I know is it your name, the producer, or is it this producer? There's a bit of
not in this. He was not a producer on this film.
Right? Is that your name? Then that's the other one.
Your name. And then he also was a producer on, I think, quite a few of his other films.
Right, that's all I know in the press circles. You see, we don't need to bring that up anyway. Anyone can go up there and do the due diligence. But that's all I really know. So my knowledge is very minute just to this film. So I'm here for the education as well. I'm generally really interested to why this stands out so much compared to his other work. Then.
Sure. Well, I guess a couple of preferences for anyone at home or prefaces. If you want maybe like a really knowledgeable take on how this fits into the anime universe, probably not going to be the podcast for you. We'll definitely talk about it here and there, but if you've not caught on already, this means more talking about the film. So if you want like, how does this fit in with the modern scape of anime and how it's evolving, not for you. Also, a lot of this film is very based, as similar with all the Studio Ghibli films, to be fair, and a lot of anime films, with specific Japanese culture, Japanese mythology. Neither of us live in Japan. Neither of us are from Japan. So there's definitely some elements there we're missing. Also, while we're the only two on the call, the good old Niccolo Grosso did plan to be here. He did watch the film. He hated the film.
Oh, wow.
So I will also try to incorporate his Letterboxd review wherever it seems fit, just so we have a differing opinion here. I think it's probably best that we start with a bit of a spoiler-free section before we get into kind of the bigger spoiler parts, because I have a feeling a lot of people haven't seen this film. And it definitely, again, goes places where I think you should try to view this as unspoiled as possible. I think a good place to start probably is in just the technicals, and then we can get into the character work and some of the more messaging here. Because I think this is where Makoto Shinkai has always thrived. The animation here is second to none. Truly, like some of the most stunning animation I've ever seen. Of any film from any person in any country. He is known for highly realistic sets. Rain has always been in animation something frowned upon because it just takes so much effort and it's so hard to make it look so good. Here there's a variety of weather, from sun to rain to snow to storms, and it looks fantastic. I don't know if Tokyo has ever looked more. It's interesting because so much of it is cold, and you would expect the cold in a similar way to like Tokyo Godfathers, maybe. I don't know if you've seen that, but you would expect it to feel cold, but it's a very warm feeling film, even when the environment is raining or snowing. It always goes back to human connection and human warmth and human spirit. That is the one place where Makoto Shinkai always thrives. So I'm not entirely shocked here. I also will mention the sound design. I fucking love in this film.
Yes.
There are so many times where they play around with a score, whether it's putting it in reverse, whether it's repeating different sounds, to where like there are times where it's similar. I don't think you like this film, but it's similar to how I watched Last Night in Soho and some of the editing in that. I just sit back and I'm like, cinema. That meme of Martin Scorsese sitting there where he's like, absolute cinema. That's me with this film on so many levels when it comes to the technical side of this. Obviously, hand-drawn animation is something that is going out of touch. Studio Ghibli not necessarily producing a ton of films anymore. This is probably the closest I would agree to sitting back and seeing something of the quality of Ghibli where it just feels blow away. I really love how this film looks, how it sounds. I think it's spectacular.
Yeah, like I'll agree with that. It was difficult watching this because I actually watched this at someone else's house, one of my fellow members' house, on a very small TV. And it doesn't do it justice. Like watching this in the cinema, the sound design, I agree with you. Like the orchestral thing here, where like we actually get the weather scenarios and stuff like that. It is magical. Like it is one of those things where you get this perfect balance between like a level of reality, which the film's underbelly is sort of profoundly about, but then you get sort of like those elevated levels of like we're going on a journey, and the two separations are really well done. We get like this grimy, very washed out Tokyo, Japan. And then we go up, and you have these like light blues, these whites, these pops of color. But in the cinema, like it is genuinely like splendid to watch. But the thing about it as well, because again, not knowing a great deal about the animation style here or the craft, I do think it's very brave and to fall on one sword that the defining nature of this in the animation is ultimately an integral plot aspect, of which if it isn't articulated or visually composed to a point where it feels stupendous or like even just intoxicating to watch as a viewer, to immerse the viewer into that feeling of like euphoria, by definition this film fails if it doesn't work. And the fact that it is sublime, it just elevates that level of material to that second point. Like I agree with you completely. There's detail here, or just like this whimsical knowledge of just like being generally, pardon the pun, but like whisked away. Like there's this wonderful dissonance where, again, like we would get this very much boots on the ground, moral, poignant story about like social services, again about like homelessness, organized crime, or just about like having to grow up in the modern world, especially in a place like Japan, like a cultural. Because I've done a little bit of research into Japanese culture, especially J horror. I did it at university. Did like quite a few essays on it. It's quite profound, the technological versus, let's say, religious element of Japan, like the issues of cultural hierarchy or even just social hierarchy, especially with the generational gap. And I think here it's an interesting one where it grasps that like the religious aspect of being true to. Kiyoshi Kurosawa does this brilliantly in Cure as well. Very much more adult orientated, but there's another one he made. Oh my god, it's not Cure, but it's like another one which is like, I'm gonna have to find it. It's gonna piss me off if I don't find it. I watched it last January, and it's so similar to this in a level of I can't remember. You might be able to help me out. Is it Shinduism? there's a religious aspect to.
I believe that's what it's called.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think it's such a profound element of just being one with nature, one with Japan. And I think this how this sort of projects that. I think it gets a really good idea where there's this. Again, it's not very profound in a sense of like it's very straightforward, but one with nature, enlightened, pops of color. There's a level of freedom there, but there's also a level of place. You have to be in a certain structure. You have to be disciplined and be one with nature and one with Japan. Then you go back to the other idea where you get a social construct of where ultimately those same rules should apply, but they're not freeing. They're very much. Well, the opposite to freeing. I'm blanking there, but restrictive. Let's say. I think this film does a wonderful job thematic like that, but also I do think, just to reiterate the point, that animation style does a perfect job of balancing both thematics. There is like you just get put onto a journey, and then when you get crashed back down to reality, where the gravel pavements and the tarmacs, and we get to McDonald's and we get to that capitalistic forefront of like being from a 9 to 5, looking after like your brother or your sister, and then you're just trying to live your life and living within that societal construct, and you can't even, they're not even allowing you to do that. I think that balance of being able to go on that journey and then coming back down, the animation style heightens that to a degree where it is very much more profound on a level where simplistically, obviously, we can tell there's two dynamics going on here. But when we go back and we crash back down to earth, it very much is very unsubtle, but equally as needs to be quite poignant. I think it really does a tremendous job there. Are all of these films, to what you've seen, are they all levels above each other in terms of animation style? Is there a clear indication of like it's growing within the years as well, or is it just, are they all particularly good?
For sure. I mean, like, I think it is an obvious growth with every project until you hit like probably around 2011, 2012. Then it's like really good at that point, and it's kind of minuscule jumps from there. I mean, Your Name looks incredible. I would say this is a step above Your Name. I don't know if his next film after the Suzume, I wouldn't say it's a step above. I think here's where he kind of plateaus with it. He reaches the top of the mountain.
Okay.
But for sure, I mean, and he also started with like indie animation, so that's obviously going to look way worse than this.
That Kurosawa film's charisma, by the way, it's tremendous.
I need to watch more of his films.
Yeah, it's very similar. Like it's a because the digital age of millennium in Japan is an interesting one, because they have a millennial crash in the late 90s where their economy is just wiped out. And then there's an issue of growth rates with birth rates and stuff, technological advancement, and then that's where you get the 90s, the J horror stuff comes into fruition. So since then, like Japan, because you have the Akira Kurosawa, you have the issues of societal pressures of going from one type of era to the next after the war. Kurosawa does that, and then Godzilla comes around in the 50s as well. And then throughout that, you have Kinji
Mizoguchi.
Who comes out with like the Battle of Honor series. You get like the discipline ideation of the mafia. Oh my god,
Yakuza.
Yeah, Yakuza. You get all that the dissonance of having to try to find a home because the government can't help you. Then you get into the late 80s, like the 90s. You get like the Takashi Miike stuff. You get the explosion of horror in the early 90s, and then bang, J horror just goes off, and it sort of come back down into a level of finding. We probably say exploring generational trauma now. Like they've always done it. The Japanese cinema's always done that. But it's interesting how much more it relates to the religious aspects of culture rather than like the American stuff. Like it's a Western, not say American, like British, American ideation of stuff. If you explore generational trauma, I find that British stuff does the personal stuff. So it'll be a family who's on welfare, the kitchen sink drama, the Mike Lee, stuff like that. and I'm again, Ken Loach would be another one. And then in America, it's not so the individual; it's more sort of the generational aspect of it. Also, there's a lot more recent history in America we don't need to get into, which unfortunately feels like it's making a trembling return for some reason now. Like people don't seem to learn, but is interesting like that, and I suppose that Japan, strangely similar to being occupied by the West after the war. Um, it's an interesting one. It feels like you go from the individual and you go to the exploration of, like, again, societal, cultural thing. And I think this film does a tremendous job of it. And I think we explored this in Grave of the Fireflies. That's probably a little bit, that's more so on the nose, Grave of the Fireflies, than this. I think because, again, you're dealing with two. What one is like a genuinely frightening depiction of being a child during horrifying events, which is singular to that time, but also quite profound in the conversation we had then, which in a certain thing that's happening in current political crisis now, which is even more terrifying, which we spoke about there. This one is more sort of akin to, we are told generation in a way of like, well, you brought up, you do your taxes, you get a good job, and then life is sort of taken care of. But it's so much more. Sort of, it's not as black and white as that. It really isn't. You can't just get a job at McDonald's and being able to sort of have a living wage. And I think this does a really, really great job. I'm just going to reiterate this point quite a lot throughout this podcast, though. But I really do think this does a really poignant job of showcasing that the enrichment is obviously not through financial gains, but through keeping the family together. But but even by doing those steps of getting a job, being part of society, earning a paycheck, and going along with your way, sometimes it's just not enough to survive. And I think this is a really good type of age range of getting that across, where, not damning like not damning life in a way, but also being quite open and honest about, there are people who are very less fortunate, but there's equally as in a situation very much like you who just still can't afford to progress or live. And I think it's very hard in a animation type of style. I think Disney has tried a few times. I think Coco was there. I haven't seen any of the other shit. Inside Out was close. I haven't seen its sequel. I haven't seen Elemental. I've not seen that Red thing, whatever it was. I know you're a massive fan of Disney stuff, but we've watched this before. We watched that stupid one with Chris. What's that stupid one with Tom Holland? We did it on the podcast years ago. And
oh God,
what was that called? Oh, well, they cut out the gay case, and it's like, what the fuck? This is during COVID as well. What was that?
Well, I'm blanking on it, but I know what you're talking about.
Again, it's just back to the point where, like, I think Disney's failed to grasp those two of serious issues, and not in a childlike manner, but keep it to a point where, like, I think Moana does a good job about loss, about openness, about being locked away and then being able to explore one's culture. And I think Coco does that as well, in a sense of exploring, like, not being trapped within the realm of cultural expectation, or even just because you have an accent or the color of your skin, you should be proud to explore those roots, which is again akin to the cultural heritage of America as well. But in Japan, obviously, it'd be somewhat different. I'm rambling now, but the point of it, I think just things a really good job of getting the two and being educational, also being this fantastical element. I think it does a really good job. Very probably more so humanized than this is going to be. I'm going to get absolutely roasted for this, I'm sure, but the people. But I think this is a really good humanized take compared to a lot of Miyazaki stuff as well. Maybe this is to a point you might argue against me that it might be too on the nose of stuff, because I remember watching this in the cinema where there's a certain bit in here where there's a very adult orientated like bit here with a certain thing, and I was shocked in the cinema that I actually didn't know what age range was this. I didn't know if people. I honestly did not know how far this would go, and it really does like touch on a tremendous amount of like adult-oriented themes. Did you know anything about going into this, or this is a blind watch for you as well, or was this?
This was a blind watch. No, I had no idea.
Were you shocked when those things started to happen, or did you just go along with it? Because it did punch me for a little bit. I was like, oh, what?
It's hard without knowing what you're talking about. I'll be honest, but
There's a certain
I will.
okay,
a certain weapon, sure. Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I guess, caught me off guard just because I think I would have expected. Yeah, I mean, but yes, I guess the overall message is yes, I agree with you.
Do you think a normal audience would be able to differentiate this between Miyazaki then?
I mean, I think it feels different in quite a few ways. I mean, to be fair, this guy Shinkai like got the nickname of being the next Miyazaki between, especially with Your Name, but also with this. Like, people really started to view him as being the next Miyazaki and putting those two in conversation with each other. So I would say that people probably had a similar experience where this is at least the closest to Miyazaki they probably felt like they could get with what anime is, I guess.
And this is a rival studio, is that correct as well?
Yes, it is a rival studio, but
it's released
Studio Ghibli's not really working. Yeah, I mean, Studio Ghibli's not really working. So I don't know if it's like they're in competition with each other.
Yeah,
I just think this one's currently working. Yeah.
Because I just think walking into this, it's quite like not like a cultural shock. I'll take that back, but it's quite a thematic shock. Because again, like I talk about going into an animated film and seeing something. Maybe that's why this is again. Bear with me here, but I feel like it's very similar to the likes of what Sausage Party did and then there was a few other type of animated films for a little bit in a period.
Yeah,
stay with me here, and that you go into this idea, perceived connotations of what an animated film is: childlike, colourful, silly, 70 minutes long, and then you watch something like raunchy, and there's a dissonance there. I think a lot of it works. Like, as stupid as that film is, nobody's watched that TV sequel series. I don't know anyone who has actually even mentioned that.
Not me.
No, Foodtopia. That just came out and died. But the likes of this is an interesting one because I think you gravitate towards a certain audience of anime. But then in a certain type, anime is quite adult oriented anyway. That's how naive I am. I'm just sort of realizing that, or what I'm shown on Twitter or X, should I say. Incredibly quite like adult. There's a TV show that we watched when we were in Japan, and oh my god, I'm gonna get roasted. My wife made me watch it, and it was a live action version of it. When we watched it as well, it was really good. About a young girl. Oh my god, and she wore like this red outfit, and she could like either see stuff in the future or like the boyfriend or something, and it was quite profound to watch it. I really liked it, and this is equally similar. It'd be interesting to recommend this because, again, trying not to be like in the spoiler-free section, but this touches on stuff where I know I'm reiterating myself here, but genuinely shocked they went there. Genuinely shocked. This is not just a simplistic childlike rendition of there's a girl who can control the weather. There are serious ramifications here of like losing one's family, running away, like having to do things to survive, and then ultimately even trying to escape, let's say, this system, but ultimately having to be confined into it. Like there's a very dark connotations here. There's not very much light-hearted energy. There's a whimsical nature to this, but it is very much an experience of profound poignancy throughout, which still shell shocks me today watching it and be like, oh my god, because again, like there's certain iconography here and certain connotations, especially the whole ending thing, the whole like last third in like grimy hotel room where they're like changing names and then they're on like the news, and it gets to a point where you're watching something that feels so far removed from the nature aspect to it. Do you find that do you think it's a dissonance that takes itself too far apart, or do you think they merge quite well together?
I think for me it merges well. I think it merges quite well because the film itself, I think, paces itself like perfectly. And I
Right.
think it's an extremely watchable ride. I think if you try to tear apart the narrative threads here and the messages here, it does get very muddy at times. I mean, you have the environmentalism message here, and then there's also a lot of like both mixture of mythology and then the logistics of that. You have the character drama, their actual personal journeys and what they're going on. You have a large theme here of loss for a lot of different characters who've lost someone or lost their family in some way. You have everything here about trying to make it in the city, Japan's economic status, what you have to do to survive the dark or whatever, however you want to tackle that tale. There's a lot here that is happening. But I think it overall crafts itself, so it threads itself well enough to where I was never sitting there like, well, what happened to this narrative plot? I think it works fine as a film.
So without without
Well, we
going to the
can
point. No, I
we
I'm not.
can
I don't want to spoil
go for
anything.
it.
You're at 5 stars with this. Am I correct? What?
Absolutely, yes.
So what stands this out to that degree for you then? Like, because I'm at like a 4
Sure.
because I think visually I just think this enraptures the viewer at certain points here, where you get there's a lot of films where you watch it and you get there's an immersion level because you're into it, but then
Sure.
there's other aspects where you just become you be you're one with the screen, and I think there's very few films in a sense where you go out the canon. Like the canon would be obviously with the yellow brick road and the Wizard of Oz, stuff like that, or just elements where like there's
Yeah.
canon defining entries where the film opens up or something happens and you're into it. There's this level of immersion. There's very much now like where it's like a set piece oriented because most of it's already been done before. But I still think this is just like I just like watch it like wow. Like you could like there's an energy like there's a dare I say there's actually like a texture to this where you could
Yeah.
like you just want to be up there like you want to feel like that this water you want to feel the air like there's just like so much to it where I don't know how it's perhaps how it's probably because it's the animation style but how it's constructed like there's a feeling of just wanting to be one with the screen, which sounds like
Yeah.
might sound like pathetic coming from like you're talking about movies, but I do think that there's such a wonderful nature to that, like just wanting to be there.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's crucial for this film because
Oh, undoubtedly.
these characters, and I'll answer your question in a minute, but like especially this main character, he goes against every expectation and logical expectation you have in a way that it's like supernatural. He lives, I mean, you mentioned the nature stuff. He lives on this island surrounded by nature. In Grave of the Fireflies, we talked about it, but also throughout Studio Ghibli and just Japanese cinema, there is such a nostalgia for the time before the big cities.
Yep.
Rural Japan is something that is so valued, and he lives in a pretty rural area. And because he has this feeling inside of him that he cannot explain, it's not logical. It's not like he has a plan. Oh, I'm going there for a job or something. He feels this need to go to the city, and I think the film does a wonderful job translating the beauty and the magical little like. Yes, it's hardship, and yes, it is raining, and it's difficult, and he's not making a lot of money, and he's just barely surviving. But it has all these tiny little magical moments where you understand that struggle and you can relate to him. And maybe it's something where like some people relate to him, some people won't. Nicolo Grosso said he was just a sad boy falling in love with a quirky girl, and that's all that was happening in this film. Not sure how that is the take, but valid. I think the desire though for you to be there. You get that desire translated from these characters onto the screen into you, and that is crucial. Why I'm at 5 stars is this has the trifecta for me. The technical elements, as we mentioned, are amazing. The filmmaking
Mm-hmm.
is like blow away every time. I just sit back and am amazed. Incredibly watchable. We kind of already mentioned some of it, but like this film is so smart when it comes to comedy. I think the film is so infectious with its journey. It is so easy just to throw this on and get sucked into this world and sucked into this adventure and sucked into this world. Then the third one, and maybe here we will transition into being open to spoilers. We don't necessarily always need to spoil everything, but in its message. I think it's incredibly meaningful and bold. At the end, when you have an environmentalism message like this, I can't think of many films that take the take of this film. Ultimately, it comes down to the question of should she sacrifice herself and fix the world, fix the natural disaster that is happening, fix climate change and global warming is obviously the larger conversation here. Or should she let nature take its course and stay there with him? And this main character, who in the hero role, everyone's obviously going to sacrifice and save everyone else, makes a selfish decision, no, for you to stay. And then there's the consequence of Tokyo flooding. But the film takes it in this angle where it's trying to say, like, number one, removing the burden on youth, which is like a huge thing, is that youth is expected to fix the world and sacrifice to fix the sins of the past. It is saying, youth, you don't need to do that. That's not your responsibility. But also that this take of like, oh, Tokyo was once a bay and it used to be covered in water and this is just nature doing its thing. We shouldn't necessarily always villainize or like try to it's a very nuanced take, I guess, to display giant, massive climate change in this sense as being something that is natural and part of life and has always been part of life and something that you can live through. It's a very nuanced take alongside every other conversation in this, obviously. It goes places in that emotional journey with these characters that is not just bold, but I think incredibly meaningful and moving. I think it's a daring film, to be honest, in its messaging towards the end. So for me, that trifecta makes it to where like I cannot find a flaw with this film. I am amazed by the film. It is adding to this. I have to give that a 5 stars. I am curious why you are at a 4 and not a 5. What is that 1 star really holding you back?
Well, just briefly on the connotations of the climate change, and I think this is quite a profound conversation in the difference between the Eastern and Western audience viewership, because I think from when you look at the Western thing, you see that as like, oh, the flooding, it's like a death sentence. It's flooding Japan, like it's flooding Tokyo. That's horrific. Purely because when you see it in the Western media, you like Katrina, and you see a lot of floods in England a lot. But primarily with the stuff that happens in America, it is fright. It's like it's terrifying. It kills people. It's a generational issue. Like Katrina's never recovered. And I remember watching like the TV bulletins on BBC News. Black families decimated to had never really recovered. You see it as this thing where it doesn't wash away. It destroys in its path. It's not a natural occurrence. It's a catastrophe. That's in no way implying that's incorrect, but that's a Western ideology of it. It's interesting when you look at the Eastern ideology with Shintoism, because ultimately, how do things grow? How does the bed of soil where the plants grow? How like through water, through rain? It's interesting. Like it washes it away in Tokyo, and the ideology, the idealism of it is that now it can grow again. It can root and they'll build on top of it. It was once a bay. Man came, built up, and then Mother Nature comes back in its cycle. And it drowns it again, and mankind will build it back up, and they'll, there's an interesting cycle there. There's a cultural differentiation between the two, and I think it's absolutely so interesting. I think that's where I get to your point as well. I find that the cultural differentiations, but also the thematic ones due to that, are very compelling, but also much more engrossing as a Western audience. Perhaps that's why this is so engaging to both of us, or not just both of us. Not like we're just the two people in like the Western Hemisphere. Like, this is amazing. I just think it's an interesting parallel between the two and how it lands thematically in Japan and where it was here. Because I think we would see that as a negative connotation of what happens there, or the selfish girl, like she's killed all these people. I think in the Eastern world, it probably seen a little bit more different than that, and that man has made its choice. She's now one with nature, so allowing nature to take its course. Who is she? Who is mankind? to getting into the way of Mother Nature. Perhaps that's the connotations. Again, I'm not fluent in the ideology of Shintoism or Japanese culture to the degree that someone who was a natural born there would perhaps be able to educate us on. But I just think there's such an a parallel there. I've had to sort of come to terms with that, because you're ingrained in Western culture of those things, especially with like sort of the news, which is like very much damning all the time in the Western hemisphere. For anyone out there who's listening, it's as bad as I think everyone who there's very little aside from like local news. Everything is morbid, everything is grim, everyone is dying. What happens next? Your money's going to be taken away. It's immigration, it's terrorism, and you've got no civil rights. That's basically what the way. Please, honestly, come visit. There's lovely places everywhere. America's such a lovely land. So is England. Like, come over and visit. But ultimately, that is what you're thrown down very much every day in the news cycle. I'm sure that's everywhere now. But I think I've had to come to terms with that. You have to sort of become ingrained to the Japanese law, Japanese cultural instinctiveness and stuff like that. And I think once you do a little bit more soul searching and a bit more educational thing on the man, I think Weathering with You actually grows in that substance there. There's so much more integral aspect to it. The reason why it's just dropped to a 4 is purely because I think that this is very much the dissonance for me between the parallel story arcs or the thematics, let's say, I think really work well. But every time I watch this, I'm still quite shocked of where this actually goes. Not in terms of what you described there about like the final thing. I actually think that's quite a relieving aspect to it. Like, I think people would see it as a selfish ideal, and I think when I first watched it, I was like, oh yeah, I agree with that. I agree with myself, obviously, but I sort of agree with that connotations. Whereas now on the second viewing, especially after I've had this conversation, I've sort of grown to really appreciate. Like, it's not bold. I don't think it's bold. I don't think it's, with a lack of term, ballsy. I just think it's very much akin to, this is going to happen. Mankind has sort of put it to one side. They've burnt the bridges. Mother Nature has to come in now, and I think so. That's a very morbid aspect to it, depending on how you view it. Again, not to reiterate, but I still think that again, like I said, that's not an issue for me. The distance between the two, the fantastical elements or fantasy elements, and then the very much boots on the ground, the kitchen sink stuff. I just think this goes to certain places where even now I watch it, I'm like, wow, this is dark. Like, this is could this be construed or contained in a different type of scenario and still get the point across? Who am I to say? But I would if I was squeezed to making a point, I would probably argue yes. I think you could still do these things. I don't want to sort of contradict myself and say, or you can minimalize them, or you could Disneyfy them, because I think that sort of gets away with what makes this unique. I just find it a somewhat perplexing is not the right word, but I'm going to use it anyway. I still find it a perplexing thematic viewing of this narrative throughout. I completely agree with what you've said. I completely agree. I think it takes risks. I think it's an interesting thematic. I think the cultural aspect to it is totally different to what I would perceive to be coming full circle or even finding a happy ending. And that's definitely changed on my opinion of the feature the second time I've watched it, which has probably made the reason watching it even more so better. But it is just one of those perplexing things where it takes it's a personal thing here. It's a 5-star feature, undoubtedly, in creation. I just think it looks incredible. I think it works. I think it's 112 minutes. I find movies after an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes, like I sort of like squirm in my seat a little bit. I get a bit jumpy.
Yep.
I think this earns the running time. I think everything that comes, like you said about the narrative, I think everything works. There's not one aspect I'm like, oh, where does that? I think it all works completely. I just think on a my type of perspective, I have to come to sort of. It's very difficult to get my head around the cultural aspects to it. Although, ironically enough, that's what I appreciate about it the most. It definitely makes you think and feel to a degree where it's not like a characteristic psychological differences. It's a cultural thing, and you'll never understand a different culture, right, if you're not from it. It's
Right.
very like I remember that there's a very famous Denzel Washington clip about like Schindler's List and Goodfellas, or the actual term is Cape Fear because they both changed the screen, they both changed the films. But I think he compared it to like Goodfellas. It's not. It's a cultural thing. Martin Scorsese is Italian Irish American. Steven Spielberg is Jewish American. They all understand those roads very differently to what if each other swap. That's not to say that they couldn't do the jobs differently, but it would just be a very different film. This is very much a Japanese cultural heritage type of feature, exploring its specific themes, and it's not like a westernized thing, which probably just shows how naive I am. Again, I feel like I'm waffling, but I know that's a conceit. I do apologize. I just find it's very difficult to sort of explain myself with it. I don't know how
Well,
did it take you up? Sorry, go on.
I was just saying, to your credit, like there's a lot here that is again very specific Japanese. Ages is especially a big thing, but it's also very dark for anyone who's going into
Yes.
this and hasn't seen it already. There's a lot here about gun violence. There's stuff here about possible prostitution of minors specifically, which is like obviously wildly dark. There is a lot here about just like emotional sadness of loss and how holding on to people. There's just there's custody battles, like there's so much here that to unpack that's like really dark, and it's not that any of those things necessarily like the focus of the film, but definitely I would be ready for all of that if you're going into this. It is all there.
Yeah. Again, I said this like briefly. I would be interested to know what the average age range of watching
Yeah.
this, or because it doesn't. It feels like a 15-year-old type of film for me, like a 15, like you would say R-rated in your country.
Yeah.
But that just feels sort of um, like a little bit like hyperbolic to say that. It doesn't feel like it shouldn't be that. It's very much like a film where it's like a PG-13. Like you can enter at a certain point in life, and you can watch it again 5 years later, and it will totally change the way you've seen it because you can see it simplistic surface level. And I think this film doesn't hide its underbelly at all. It very much wants to showcase that. Having been there, I know the prostitution thing. Again, don't read into this at all. But we visited some of this. I can't. We might have to cut this. I'm gonna. You don't have to cut this. It's almost like I'm gonna like say something so like dirty to me. But having been to Japan and gone round with like some tour guides, they explain the aspect of the age thing there and about certain issues with the cultural aspect to it, which is not so different from a lot of other countries, west, east, whatever. But it's interesting how much it is difficult there with the 21st century idea of the internet as well. Like a lot of young, like you said about the young people, like everything's been put onto them to change the world. But the technological advancements there of how much it's hyperactive in certain sort of, not even only in the economy, but on the societal grounds. People don't talk anymore. People don't like. There's no one meeting anywhere, and it's very much like a Western ideology of going there, and going to like this. I mean, the tour guide Andy told me that you'll go to don't. He said don't go to karaoke nights because you'll just see Western people. It just isn't like it's just become a Western ideal because they see it as a Japanese cultural thing, and stuff like that. It was just interesting to see how it's turning there, like the. I suppose, but he was on about, again, back to the point about sort of the age thing and about certain things where like you have to sell certain things in stores to try and stop other things from happening, and then there's the issue of, well, should that then be legal? Because ultimately you're sort of giving a gateway to that then not being illegal, but like allowing that avenue. If anyone can read between the lines, I'm obviously alluding to a certain issue there. But the interesting thing about it is the gun control thing you mentioned, because not so long after this film, obviously the Prime Minister was shot.
Yeah.
There with a makeshift gun. And I remember being there during Japan, and there was a right wing election. I remember like being in a park eating like Japanese food with my wife, and a guy came up to us, and everyone was like driving past in like these white cars, blaring like political speeches. and he was like, "Oh, you guys from here?" I was like, to white people." I was like, "No, no, no." He's like, "Oh, these right wingers, they're fucking crazy." And I always remember him saying it, and he was like, "They're just fucking crazy," and he said it in like perfect English. He was from Japan, or I assume so. He was like, "Oh, there's just these fuckers, these right wingers are crazy," and he said that verbatim, and it's always stuck with me. And when that happened, I was like, "Oh shit!" And we've got we've got equally as harsh gun laws in England as well as Japan. We drive on the same type of the road. Same type of the road. We're driving the same road. We're equally like yeah, no, it's late. We're on this. We've got a very similar type of like culture in a way that the Brits like we go back to like the rural aspects of like people compare like our history like the Tudors. They come from the issues of like oh my god, I can't remember the terminology of it. But again, it's like a cultural thing where people look back to the past to find a level of I not like idealization, but strictness, or find a path that works. It worked then; it can work now. Like people going back to like having like a secular government, stuff like that. It's madness. Equally similar to yours in a way, but you're a very young country compared to the other two. Um, I find that we have strangely interesting things, Japan and England, but we don't really go into the degree of how sensitive the subjects in weathering with you about. I don't think people give a shit about climate change in this country. I just don't think they give a shit. Whereas in Japan, it's probably such much more. Excuse me, it's more so a profound element of being on a bay as well. I can imagine, and being very much akin to the societal wars and pressures of climate change. Whereas in England, I just don't think people give a shit. I don't know if that's a Western thing, I'm not too sure. But also, like, the gun crime thing is not an issue in this country. But the severity of having a gun in this country is equally similar to Japan. So there's again, going back to the point, there's similarities here. But I agree with you, like, it is very dark. And not as if it's like, that shouldn't be a turn off. But it's definitely like a warning that, again, that's probably why I'm not at the 5, at the 4. You go into this thinking it's definitely going to be one thing, and then it grows and evolves into such like kitchen sink darkness with delicate, brutal poignancy in its end. Like, you could probably argue here that this is such a bitter ending, but it's like arguably the most natural. How this commences is undoubtedly how this is probably ever going to end. But I think because you're watching something, again, I use the word whimsical in a sense of like it's an anime, or that's the projection I give it anyway. Which again, I know that I'm talking about my ass there. I feel like there's like this projected ideal of it being like sweet, and it'll come full circle, and everybody will hold hands in the end. But to its credit, like, it just does not want to provide that. It is very true and honest and earnest to itself, and that's one of the biggest positives I can give it. It does not sell out. It's excuse me. I don't like starting crying there. No, I'm fine. It does not sell out. It's earnest. It's a sincerity. You know. I do think it's such an undervalued trait here. You know, they're not just going to get back at the end and they can speak to grandma for the last time. Like, no, like, there's horrible things going on, and the sacrifices people have got to make, there are serious ramifications. And I think that is an Eastern ideal that has somewhat been sorely missed in Western media, in a sense that we've got to have the happy day. We've got to have the good ending. Test screenings, you know, we've got to have the good ending. He's got to get back to his wife. Like, it's just, I think at the end of the day, I think there's a level of watching that different, not an agenda, but a differing appeal and opinion for an audience. Just like, oh yeah, that's it, and there's no pushback. I think that's also an idea that I quite like about this. You know, go on. Sorry.
I'll never forget, like, in the theater, and if you ever watch this with someone else, like, when it pops up those, I think it's 3 years later, and you go back to Tokyo and it's just flooded, like, that's consequence. Like, it goes there. It doesn't, to your point, like, it's not like you get a wink, wink, like, oh, actually, everything's like, we can redo everything, or we get the best of both worlds. No, there's a choice and there's a consequence. And the fact that it goes through with that, I also think just like, that's something we need, right? We need to see that there are consequences to our
Yes.
actions for us to value our choices and to value our actions. And that's something that is so avoidant in so many films. Weirdly, I did not plan this, and maybe this is something more subconsciously about me, but like I view the endings of this and First Reformed to be very similar in weird ways, where it's like
That's
both
a typical thing for you to do as well.
no, did not plan it, but like literally like both are just about when you have this overwhelming climate change, actually in both it's climate change, but like how do you survive? And it's ultimately a selfish choice of love, and you just have to accept like the world's going to change whether or not, like it's not up to us, right? So that's very funny. But also to your point, I want to mention like this film, I love that it does not show its cards, like because we obviously go in with an expectation of what it's
Yes.
going to be, and it's not a film that, like, in the first 5 minutes you realize, oh, it's not going to be that. It very much so starts as just the tale of this boy going to Tokyo, finding these people, trying to survive,
Very
and
atypical, yeah.
slowly, absolutely, and then slowly it starts to sift and slowly starts to bring in more and more of this context and this other plot, to where by the end it's like a completely different film than at the beginning, but in a way that feels so natural. And I think that's one of the reasons also I think it works so well, especially on a first viewing, is it's just like, not in a way to where there's like a twist. It's not like Barbarian where like you get a scene and you're like, oh, from that scene on, it's very different.
Yes.
It's just this, it evolves so naturally. I think that's also one of the reasons you mentioned the longer runtime here. I think that's one of the reasons that works really well, is because it continues to evolve and grow. You're not just stuck like doing the basic Disney conflict, right? Like I think it has places to go and has things to say. Yeah, very interesting film.
Yeah, I'll say this as well. I think, not to like again push back into my own point about like liking slimmer and leaner run times, but I do think that this is the type of feature where I think you could extend this for another 3 hours and have like a mini series about it, and I still think it would be equally as profound, because all you would have to do there is just slightly elongate the arcs, which I think would be even more damning to the subject as well. I think it would elevate the material even more so, because you'd have more time to explore the microscopic issues at hand, and feel a little bit more of the pushback from it. Ultimately, the result of them. I think everything here, if it was just again, it's just so tight with everything. It's sort of like bang on here. I think, and again, genuine shock from it. I think if you would just elongate this for another 2 hours, I still think it would work rather wonderfully with flow and spending more time there. Because even then, you're presented with these arcs and these themes. There's still quite a lot of substance there you could explore to the damning effects of like the social pressures and stuff, especially with the dynamic towards the final act. But I agree with you. I think if you go into this thinking, one thing, you ain't going to come out of this thinking it when you go into it. Like, it's superb in a sense of the unpredictable nature to it. But I once again agree with you. It's unpredictable, yet it's earnest in where its direction is going. It does not sacrifice anything. It feels both unpredictable and predictable in a sense of, yes, we don't know what's going to happen, but I still think everything that does happen in there is like the natural progression of the film as well. Like, there's no twists and turns, but it's a very damning type of feature as well. It's a very heavy. Again, a lot of Miyazaki stuff on the surface, and the underbelly of it. It's all quite profound ideals or states of nature, and especially the population, or even just thematics that are very much identifiable in modern culture. But this is one of very few where it works.
I think also, though, just to your point, though, is like, I think this has to come from a younger voice. And I know in cinema, we talk so much about, some of these older voices who we absolutely adore and love, and obviously for good reason. I think this is one of the best showcases of, like, I don't think Miyazaki on a personal level views these topics or views the world in this way. I think this has to come from the new generation or next generation of filmmakers. I think it's probably one of the better displays of, like, we need constant evolving in our voices making our art, because the world is changing, so is the voices making it. I think that is one of the best parts of this. One of the best, like, things for Makoto Shinkai is, like, fully sold that people like him should be making films. Yeah.
Yeah, not to get dark and depressing here, but I also think that's the connotation of the modern issue at hand of solving these issues. It's pushed onto the youth, and I think to be young now, Christ, like I'm fucking not old or anything. I mean, granted, it has been someone's birthday, so we've got to be very careful about we talk about ages and stuff. But I do think it's interesting, like you have modern problems, and it's given to like the next generation to solve. And I think that having to deal with that and a constant looming crisis of if it's economy, social, cultural, there's a constant crisis in a world of like you're told every day that you're like what you get it so much easier in my day. Like none of us will ever buy a house. You won't be able to afford it. APRs are going to go through the roof. Medicare, Medicaid, medical health is just like, places to live in the world. Again, not to get dark and dreary about it, but I think one of the aspects of what's coming true now is that, like I said, everything is thrown onto the youth to contend with the whole issue of like you've got governmental control now telling you who you can be, what you can be. I think is absolutely atrocious. Like, how dare government control tell someone who they want to be in life? And I'm not even bothered. I'm not. I'll rephrase that. I'm not even discussing it on about names here. I'm on about gender. I want about if you want to dye your hair. I want anything. Like you're subjected to a like you've got to be you've got to have discretion. Like everything, we're meant to be an individual age. Like everything's meant, but everyone needs to be put in a certain abstract to sort of like that. I think it's ridiculous. But I also feel like that's on everyone's shoulders. But then it's also the social pressures of what's next. There's undoubtedly connections with all these issues in the last 25, 30 years, with mental health issues on the rise, issues that are going to ultimately get worse. But I think one thing about First Reformed and Weathering, what Weathering with You do is that it doesn't take aim at the individual. It says that the individual is allowed to make the decisions. An individual, as much as come to the cause of being able to speak up and change one's opinion, I think that's fully valid. But it's also one person cannot change a vast majority of people's. I mean, we've seen it before in a certain degree, but I think you've got to have the mass, not the individual. Although you can stand tall on your own, and you can still be a brick wall. There's no issue with that. But I also like the fact of like be selfish. Like that, you shouldn't not be selfish because of certain things are happening. That should be a universal issue, and that's going to be if that government wants to ignore that and just alienate people from not using a fucking bathroom, then that's up to the government issue. I think people on a whole, the individual, I think you should sacrifice a little thing that we're so helpless in the world. I think not to be in control of something that is so seismically out of our hands, rather than changing things that shouldn't need to be changed at all on a very much government control level. Not this very incel corner, so I apologise to anyone who's coming here wanting politics like that. But I do think that these films, like you said, are very important from filmmakers. Ironically, Schrader's on the other hand of this with the conversation of age here. But I agree with you, having young filmmakers come in and be like, go out there, be who you want to be, be selfish in a way that doesn't obstruct other people's livelihoods, in a sense of being like free and happy, but do what you want to do that makes you like you don't have to succumb to societal or cultural pressures. And I quite like that. I think it's this that can only evolve in time and being quite enlightened of freedom. There's a connotation of a multitude of issues there of being told, well, you need to do this because you can control this, like that. Who the fuck are they? Who is to tell this girl to be controlled in that certain way? Like she's still a human being. Because she has a gift or she has an output of a certain thing that no one else can do. That doesn't mean that she's secluded to only ever do that in her life. I like those ideas of being she's still able to be free, and ultimately, yes, there'll be ramifications of that. But that's not this girl's fault at all. Again, it's very profound, very poignant towards us. But it's the connotations and the evolution of those conversations 6 years later that still ring true and will do. And I agree with you. I think young voices coming through and being able to say that there's no judgment, there's no condemnation at all. I quite like that. I agree with you.
It's
Sorry, I'm just
super
going to say,
odd. Like, you would never, like, because the conversation sounds so depressing, right? Like,
yeah,
it sounds so sad to, like, for these films to say, like, one person cannot change the world. And, like, it's such a, like, a Disney thing almost. No, Disney's just catching strays today for some reason. But, like,
well,
they deserve it, to be
I'm
honest.
sure they'll be fine.
I don't feel bad. Like, that is such an idealistic thing, and it feels so weird to say these films, like, the film emotion in, I would say both First Reformed and this, but let's, I guess, be specific to this, is not like sadness. It's not depression. It's like, no, but you can, in that selfishness, find love specifically. The power of love is just like overwhelming in these, and find a beauty and find happiness and find freedom. It's just so nuanced in a way that you would never expect, even on paper. But like, it works so. I think it's like an empowering film.
Yeah, again, she's changed the world in a perspective of the individual. She's changed her perspective. Like, oh, like I'll change. Like, her world is her perspective, her individualization. Like, she like that is a ramification that will change her world. She's the only person, like, same as one either of us two. We can make any of the viewers, like, you can make decisions that change the world. It's just a perspective that'll change of your own. Like, if you want to, for example, if you want to become a vegetarian, that's not going to change the world, but it changes your viewpoint of how you see the world, ultimately how you live your life. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Again, if you want to, if you want to transition, if you're gay, straight, whatever it is, like, there's being true to oneself, but there's changing that perspective of your worldview, and living in the freedom of what you see as what you want to be in the world. Ultimately, that's changing the world in a sense. I think there's that issue of, like, I think you've got to be regulated to be having to make the changes for the masses. Well, unfortunately, like, putting your recycling out every Friday, if that makes you feel better, and yes, we should all do it, but if that makes you feel better and you see that as a change in the world, then that is an uplifting element to how you should live your life. You are changing the world. It is little by little, you know. I agree with those connotations. I don't. I struggle with the ideology of, you know, like for example, this is gonna be very political. But when we have COVID, right, our government was like, you should go out at 7 o'clock at night and clap for the NHS. And I sat there and I just thought, why don't we just fucking pay them what they deserve? That is the stress. The stress of having to live through that is one thing, but then the economic pressures of, like, just pay them a living fucking wage. Like, that is what's going to be able to allow them to sleep at night. And I think there's a lot of issues of where, you know, we've all got to come together and change something. Like, no, no, I often struggle with that issue. Perhaps someone out there, economist or a political journal or whatever, would be able to be like, oh well, yeah, I've got holes like a slice of cheese. Don't get me wrong, but I just think it's a really interesting aspect of being like, the individual has the freedom to express and change their worldview, and that's their world that's being changed. I like that freedom. I think First Reform comes to that conclusion as well, that there's very little you can do except for being able to be free with oneself. I think the fact that Amanda Seyfried and, like, the Babby in there as well, I think this you can still live without the prejudice or imprisonment of, like, the future. You know, very dark stuff. Not very dark, but just grimy.
But true,
Isn't it?
like that,
Yeah,
like,
of course, yeah.
reality can be dark. Go watch Jodie Comer's Help, and then say, you need clapping.
God,
Valid.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, fuck.
Yeah.
There were bad times. Again,
What a hot take. COVID
yeah,
was a bad
yeah,
time.
that's the
It
hot
was.
take. Yeah, sorry, that might be one for the that might be out of put. But I think that it's interesting when you look at Weathering for You and you look at the social climate as well of all these things that have happened. We don't
Yeah.
learn.
No.
Look at Katrina. What's Katrina 2006? Maybe a bit earlier than that. It's fucking 20 years ago, and there are towns there gone. But there's nothing being built again. Like you see it all the time where the floods, and you see the government go down there, if it's presidential or if it's local government, whoever, and there's aid, but nothing. But then the news cycle is in a year it gets forgotten about, and those people live with the ramifications of a government that have left them in the shit. And I think that in those scenarios, like you just get left. And I think weathering for you, there are not that these are the similar scenarios, but there's quite a bold move to suggest that that's a natural thing in that Eastern cultural ideology. I think that's a difficult thing to, as a Westerner, again go back to another point, but to gravitate towards. But I still think that's an interesting aspect in that cultural religious connotations. One that I find it really difficult to get my head over, but undoubtedly a very much profound one.
There's also a big profound statement on kind of science where this film, obviously, and it's fictional, presents this whole ecosystem in the sky and is just presents this theory of science doesn't Earth is alive and we don't actually know all the secrets to it, and we don't know how it interacts or how it behaves per se, which is another bold thing. There's just so much we're an hour into this and there's so much here that we still haven't even discussed. I think it's a very worthwhile film for multiple rewatches.
It makes me think of can you imagine in Twisters? They just allow it. The ending was just let it take over Louisiana, and they're like, "What?" It's just let it decimate Louisiana. We will build back up. It's just it's such a distinctive difference in a Western audience. Glenn Powell wouldn't allow that to happen. He would ring his friend Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise would say, "Well, I need to just go back to, ring L. Ron Hubbard and see what he says." But otherwise than that, Powell's going to take that on his own, and with Daisy, whatever her name is, Daisy.
But it is weird to think I think of I don't know if this is the mindset where you live, but when there's a wild animal or something, the mindset is always well, we built on their land, so it's okay that there's a coyote or whatever here. You have to accept that. It is weird that humanity was let's just move where there's these giant tornadoes, and then that's also an issue. But it's you didn't have to live where there's tornadoes. I don't know. There's just so many it's really quite a nuanced conversation when you bring in the Western ideology also, because that's obviously not present within the film. It's all just I don't know. It's super weird. Why would you build in a bay?
Yeah, well, Mother Nature moves man. Man does not move Mother Nature.
Right.
You can stop the weed from growing underneath the porch. Now, this isn't. I'm not alluding to anything there. But that weed will grow through, and I think it's there's very profound. I'll say this one thing to just end on. After seeing Nosferatu, our Italian friend has become a right grumpy bastard. Don't you think? He's become very very grumpy since watching that. I'd be very interested to know if his short film.
Look, he's been spending a lot of time in a certain place.
Berlin. What can I say?
I don't,
But I can imagine that he watched Edgar's film was a bastard robbed quite a lot of me, because I can imagine his new film is very bloody. But Nicola Grasso will jump it out of the park. Do you think you could?
He hated this. I can't believe he despised this film.
He's on Nosferatu, and he was Eggers stole something off me, and I cannot wait to watch his shot, because I'm sure that there's some vampirism there. I'm definitely telling you, he was
for sure
shot here. But I just want very briefly, because we talked about the connotation of not American, but Westernized and Easternized. You can Westernize this. You can remake this. You can Disneyfy this. You can live action in an American viewpoint. Could you? You think this is very much solely a Japanese cultural thing that does not translate, or do you think you could attempt to do this with positive outcomes, or do you think it's just nah?
Probably nah. I'm sure you could pick one or two conversations in here, but I think it's just everything. I think every conversation kind of is not really easy to translate to Western audiences in the same way. And then when you intertwine them all together and you tangle them all up, I probably would not say that.
Yeah, I don't think you could get a director who could balance the thematics either. I don't think you could get a director of a Western. You probably could do, but from just on the top of my head, I don't think you could get a director of Western Hemisphere who could manage these fantastical elements, the whimsical nature to everything, the beauty, and then bring it back to a fucking Blade Runner dystopian. Ken
also,
Loach.
We don't do mythology like Japan does. I don't know about where you live, but like I like Japan's culture like loves not only just like nature, but they like have all this mythology and they love that and they respect that, and it has like a weight there and a value. Like we in America don't really do that. We traded that for the guns, you know, like we give us guns all day
Well,
every day, but we don't really do like a valuing of like that, to where like I don't think a lot of Japanese works would translate to Western audiences.
I don't think we even have any values in the UK anymore. I don't like. It's funny because every time I turn on this, can again, you might want to cut this, but every time I turn on the TV, it's like they're coming over here, they're stealing our jobs. First of all, who is there? That's never ever get. No one ever dares say like who are they. Like if you're going to be like, openly fucking racist or xenophobic, at least fucking who is there. And also, what are they taking from you? Like what values do you have that they're taking from you? Oh, like what you know, they're taking the church. Like nobody under the age of 35 goes to church in England anymore. Like it's not a thing. It really isn't. Like what are they taking? Like Sharia law. All right, so it's definitely like it's just like Islamophobia. Then is it like we're so
Yeah.
like they're so like fucking scared to like if you like again we've seen it in what happening in your country as well. People are, like openly racist now,
Yeah.
and again it's like I don't know where I'm going with this this chat, but again like I think it's a difficult thing to like explore those Japanese themes about Mother Nature and I think because what is there left to take in England now? The state's taking everything from you government's taking everywhere from you. They're going to take the welfare, and they're going to take medical care from you. There's very little now that you could even strip from England. We're starting to fucking frack in this country now. Like what? It just like where it's
Yeah.
still like it feels like in Japan when you watch those films, there's hope for change. Which again, a person from Japan would maybe disagree with it, but it feels like there's a hope, there's a hopefulness there, and I think if this was made here, it'd be like I think we're fucked, and I think that's
Yeah.
that's another aspect that makes me so uncomfortable. Again, to like we're damned, aren't we? Like it's just like you're just left to rot. So and this is so dark.
No, yeah,
I've
for
come on here to
sure.
talk about anime, and I made it all political. I do apologize, but
Well,
I just don't
the
think
film is political,
yeah,
to be fair.
you couldn't Americanize this. You could do,
No.
but it just wouldn't be very good. You could not do it. You could animate it, and it would like yeah, but what you can do it in the streets of Delaware, where there's a kid with another girl who's got a younger brother, and she's like the prostitution, and then like she can like change the weather, and then he's got a gun and he accidentally shoots someone. Like, you could do it, but the tone would be so distinctively different because of the connotations of the culture. And that's why I perhaps even
Yep.
like this even more because it's so akin to being like earnest to itself. It's just so sincere to its beliefs and it's sincere to its spiritualism, let's say, which is a perfect
Yeah.
word to describe it. It just does not translate very well at all, and I think I like that for it. Just so bubbling and
Agreed.
but maybe it's like
Especially after Your Name, which was a huge hit internationally, to make a
yes,
film that is not, because so many other filmmakers would make just like a really simple, really basic, really like trying to just continue that commercial success from across the globe. And this is very much so like not holding any punches back in that regard. Which again, I think speaks to the director. I think that speaks though, like what you're talking about, like Japan, and I understand Japan, like has a lot of issues socially and
yeah.
politically, and to outsiders, again, maybe idealizing it, but like it just feels like they have like a general like basic care for each other, where like maybe again issues, but like it does feel like they just simply kind of do want the best for each other, and that's like gone away. Like I don't feel like in Japan they're tweeting like openly racist, like politicians are tweeting openly racist and transphobic and homophobic things to other politicians. Like it just feels like there's not that, which I think is also maybe why so much of culture, Western culture, I like idolizes Japan and loves Japan, because like I don't know, even like when you go there, from what I hear, like there's not like litter on the streets, like there's
Yeah, I was
basic
gonna say that,
decency
yeah.
to like pick it up and put it in the trash. Like there's just, it seems like there's basic decency for each other, where like at least in America, I assume it's really similar for you, like that's just gone. There's no decency actively. Like people are going out of their way to try to like ruin each other's lives as much as possible in a way that's like exhausting.
Yeah, I mean, having been there, there's like three or four things that's quite eye-opening. Like, there's no litter on the streets whatsoever. Um, they do have an issue with racial things. That's undoubtedly true. Like I've been on a train and witnessed it. It's very uncomfortable to watch. Um, that, but they're very much akin to like, um, it's very much a work ethic thing over there as well. Like that, like they don't smoke in the street or anything. Like it's just it's very totally different thing. But like everyone greets each other. Everybody greets each other. Like if you open a door, you greet someone. Um, Everyone was really lovely to us when we were there. Really lovely. But there's obviously reasons for that as well. There's a colonialism issue with like the American stuff as well. So they like American people. And like just say they're like white people. Like I'll just be very bare bones with it. I've seen that firsthand. But we went to like Mount Fuji and stuff, and they're very much like um, bow down to like like an energy aspect to it, like the cultural landscape, and understand that like, the heritage there. But the one thing that was interesting is like we were there, and there's certain aspects to it where like an Americanization, like granted, this is to do with an economy, and I think this is a false narrative in a sense. But we were on the bullet train, and if the trains are late there, they actually give you a ticket so you can give to your boss to tell you that the train was late. And I think obviously that on the surface that's like a really quite profound thing, but really it's because it's an economy drive there. Like people are so tired they sleep in like literally in the road, or they sleep on the stairs. It wouldn't happen in America, but in the same token, if you were late 5 minutes on the bus, you were fired in America. There's just an interesting parallel there, but yeah, I agree with you everything you said.
Well, I think that's going to do it. I don't know if you have any final thoughts to share. I'll just say, like, I love the film. I think after this conversation, only cementing that I love it. I think this is not just in a vacuum, like a really, really fascinating picture, and one that has so much to think about and dissect. But then you add the context of Makoto Shinkai's career, you add the context of everything with Japan we've talked about, and I just feel like everything just makes it even richer. I don't know why. Again, I don't like any of his other films. I think like Your Name is like fine. Outside of that, I think it's all pretty like not great. I don't know why this one is just such a gem in his filmography for me, but like it's one I keep coming back to, and it's one I really appreciate. So I love that we were able to talk about it on the podcast. Do you have anything left you would like to say about Weathering with You?
I'm every time I watch this, I'm just shocked about where this goes. I think it always surprises me. I don't want to watch this for a long time purely because like the discussions we've had on it. I think I've rinsed this every fibre of its being, but I still think this is a feature that works very simplistic on surface. But if you open this up, I mean, the connotations of this are just like its language and its abstracts. It's a really in depth, detailed feature full of substance and sustenance. And I'm glad we've had the chance to talk about it. But yeah, it's interesting because obviously I miss Your Name, and I miss, is it Suzumi as well? That's another one that's somewhat famous. And there's another one, isn't it? Like 5 centimeters per second, like
Yeah.
which you hated. And there's Garden of the Word. Is it Garden of the Words? Yeah. There's a lot of like short stuff, and then he goes on like 2 hour stuff. So maybe I'll try watch certain things, but.
I think Jakob's a pretty, I could be wrong, but I believe Jakob's a pretty big fan of a lot of his work.
Yeah, I would love to know his opinion on this. But and again, what I would have wanted to ask Jakob, and hopefully he's listening to this. Obviously, Jakob's got a young daughter. I was just so interested to know if it allowed her to watch this, or how if she had, what she would have thought about this. Because again, about about like the thematics here. I wonder how that lands as someone who is like in the 30s or 20s, in the 30s. That's me for anyone out there. Or mid-20s or whatever. Fucking hell. Okay, Carson. But then like a young girl watching this and seeing how they describe or see the connotations, and see if there's any sort of like not just pushback, but how that someone sees that type of entertainment. I would think that was really interesting, because all I've ever seen is reviews. I haven't seen anyone from like a younger generation look at this. That's the one thing I mean, got to be careful typing that sort of stuff in. But I just want to listen to someone who like relatively young watching this and being like, this was amazing, and just seeing what they took from this. Because I think if Jakob watched this with his daughter, I think obviously there's two different experiences there. But I think there's two drastically different experiences there, and I would love to know what they spoke about, because Jakob's viewing stuff's really interesting and integral to how he looks at a film as well. I'm surprised he loves this guy's work. I'll watch some more of it. I've got a lot of shit to watch this year, so I'll get to it. But thank you very much for for inviting me to watch it because it's an interesting experience. Wasn't as good as the cinema. Watch these in the cinema, but we just get them dubbed. We don't get them subbed.
That sucks. Did you watch it subbed or dubbed this time around?
Dubbed.
Fair enough.
I watched it with another person on a tiny screen. They couldn't hear anything, but we had to watch it dubbed. I didn't mind it. Some of them can be like. Obviously, we both watched Squid Game season 2. I watched it dubbed. It was tremendous, tremendous. It was like, yeah, that's a strange one. Dubbed is always a strange one, but I think Miyazaki's the one who gets it always right with the dubs.
I've heard the Boy in the Heron with Robert Pattinson's very good.
Yeah, Ponyo with Christine Bale and Liam Neeson. Strange one. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, if you want to watch Weathering with You, at least in the United States, it's streaming on Max. It's also widely available on other streaming platforms to rent or purchase. I'm sure worldwide it is the same. Question of the week this week is going to be asking, what is your favorite anime movie? I will start. I've already mentioned this on the podcast, so I'm going to be somewhat quick. My Neighbor Totoro absolutely fills my heart every single time. It's my favorite Miyazaki. Not necessarily the most this is definitely favorite rather than best, right? Because Grave of the Fireflies is incredible. Go check out our episode, and definitely hits way higher emotional poignancy and impact than My Neighbor Totoro. But there's very few films that just fill me with the joy that this movie does, and I think it's just really remarkable in some ways. So I love that film. Jack, what is your favorite anime film that you've seen?
This is really hard to do because I had I'm not going to go on forever, but there's a few. I like texture, so I like 2D stuff. 3D stuff I like, but I'm not overtly keen on. But I like texture, and there's sort of a pattern here. So there's I put 2 down, but I'm going to put 3 just so because you're going to get an idea here. So the first one is Fantastic Mr. Fox. So is that animated? That's animated, aren't I? I just love the texture on there. I can smell it, I can feel it. And the other one is Isle of Dogs. Watched that in a cinema. There was 2 people in there. I was one of them, and I'm sure the other person worked there. I just remember watching it again in Japan culture as well, and just loving it. Oh my god, I love the texture here. And the third one is Corpse Bride. I've always loved Corpse Bride, Tim Burton thing. And then and I will say, go listen to the Grave of the Fireflies episode. We got deep on that as well. These films are hidden with such substance. The Japanese market here is there's so much profound, again, substance under the surface here on multitude of these features. There's a lot of generational trauma explored here, but even cultural trauma and cultural issues. They're very much two-tone. Great stuff the selection to watch of what I've seen so far anyway. But yeah, those are Fantastic Mr. Fox, Corpse Bride, which I love. 2005. God, what when Tim Burton was at his peak. And then Isle of Dogs, which I think there's a decent trifecta, if I may say so myself.
Isle of Dogs is so fun. I think that's so underrated.
Yeah, definitely.
But Mr. Fox is also great. And yeah, Tim Burton. I don't know if you were here for it, but I saw on the podcast a few weeks ago, I feel there's nothing more depressing in life as a film fan than going to look at old Tim Burton because it's so good. And now it's not. With that,
Miss Peregrine, not a big fan of Miss Peregrine.
Yeah, can't say it did much for me. I'll be
friend's
honest.
in that. Well, not my friend, but I have an acquaintance who's in that film.
Wow.
Yeah, it was filmed
Dumbo?
in Cornwall. Yeah. Dumbo IMAX. Yeah, that was a bad experience. Yeah, what the fuck I was doing there, I don't know.
You can let us know your favorite anime or animated films, I guess, on Twitter or X or wherever. With that, let's go to our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we haven't talked about on the podcast. I'm going to try to go rather quick. The 6888 I watched just because Diane Warren got nominated for Best Original Song here. Not a good film, but Kerry Washington's fantastic here, so it is really depressing because she's literally giving, I think, an awards worthy performance, and the rest of the film is just very, very basic. I watched The French Connection for the first time. William Friedkin. What a slick, really, really excellently crafted action film. The action sequences here are super captivating. shocked it won Best Picture. Like, I do not see
Yes.
the
Yeah.
narrative for that in the slightest, but like still a baller pick, let's be clear. I went to the cinemas, I watched the animated new film Dogman. Amazing, incredible cinema, truly. Like, it reminds me of, like, there's most kids films, let's be clear, are really, really poor. This is so funny, genuinely some good emotions. Like, if you want to go just entertain your kids at the cinema for a day, I think this is like an incredible option. I watched the director's cut of Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Wow.
Didn't really know what to expect here and really blown away by it. Spielberg is obviously great. But here, not only do you have just like a really, really unique alien invasion movie that's super like quiet, it is super realistic feeling, but also obviously Spielberg is dealing with a lot of family stuff within this. I think especially after Fabelmans, this one like hits really quite decently. The original All Quiet on the Western Front is really strong, 1930, I believe. I prefer the remake a little bit, but this is still emotional. An American in Paris is super, it's quite basic, but I think if you want like a big Technicolor musical, it's hard to find something this effective. I finally, for the first time ever, watched 500 Days of Summer, and like I kind of hated it. It's so baked. Like, I understand back in that, like when it released, 2009, I would have been here. I would have enjoyed it. I would have loved it. Now it's so cemented in that style that like I found it to be kind of unwatchable, I'll be honest. And then finally, I watched from the Twisted Childhood universe, or whatever they're calling it, Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare. This is the same universe that has the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey films. They're doing the Avengers crossover of all the Disney horror characters, I guess. I feel weirdly like these films are not good. This is the first one I would describe as being like quite decent. It's so weird because the first one was just like this obvious cash grab to try to like, oh, funny, Winnie the Pooh is now, you can make the films with it. It's open. So we're going to make a horror film with it. But then they took the box office of that and like have started to try to make like real films. And again, the writing's not great, but this one especially interjects like some really interesting stuff when it comes to trans perspectives.
Oh, wow.
Like, I feel like this universe is growing to where like maybe it's just going to plateau here and it's all going to be like 3 stars max, but like I'm kind of here for it, and I'm like, they just keep impressing me enough to where I'm like, I'm going to at least give the next one a try. So I don't know, I'm here for this, but I know a lot of people hate it, so whatever. Jack, what have you seen recently?
I'll be quick here. I'm going to run through a few of these, and then I'll go into a little bit of detail about a few of those. I watched The Substance. I loved it. It's a film of like two quarters and then a third, and I was like, what? I've been wanting to watch this for ages. It didn't really show at any cinemas near me, and the Blu-ray doesn't come out like for a while. So I found like a limited showing like one Sunday afternoon somewhere like very local to me, and I really enjoyed it. It was really good on the cinema screen. That dynamic between Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley is very, very good. I think how it showcases like sexuality, like sensuality, but like just like nature of the body as well. The female form, like I think how the perspective, how they change, and how it looks at that, I think is quite poignant, profound. I think its last third is spectacular, very Cronenberg-esque, very more Cronenberg than the fucking Wolfman was. That was a ridiculous statement, whoever made that in the beginning, but I liked it. I give it 5 stars. I thought it was profound. I watched The Order not knowing it was Justin Kurzel, and just for a bit of backstory here, me and Justin haven't been friends for a little bit. Loved Macbeth. One of the very few people who liked Assassin's Creed, although I think he just fundamentally got that film wrong in the sense of what Assassin's Creed was. We did the true history of the Kelly Gang on the ClapperCast, one of the first episodes. Rory and George, who were on it, loved it. I hated it. I just thought, like, I did not know what he was doing in that film. I just don't know why he was choosing to do certain things where it's like just all fictional, and then try and elevate the material and not elevate, but like heighten it with certain cinematic approaches. Then he did Nitram, which was like a serial killer in Australia, which I also hated. And then I watched The Order, not knowing it was he had directed it. And I thought it was very, very, very good. Very, very good. Again, Nicholas Hoult having a fucking great summer. A great last year. I think he's going to have another fucking great summer this year. He's got Superman coming up and a few others. I think he's fabulous in Nosferatu. I think he's really good in this. I thought Jude Law was very good as well. I think Ty Sheridan gets lost in it, but if you want like a 70s crime thriller, watch The Order. I've had a little bit of a Bogart thing this year because I'm I've come to the conclusion. I've had this chat with my wife. I actually hate modern cinema. I've just fallen out of love with it. I just detest it. Every time I go watch something now, like, why am I watching where? Like, we have this chat every year, me and you. Like, we always do this. We hit a brick wall. I've just hit it in fucking January. I've had enough. I'm probably going to try to go to Venice this year or whatever. I enjoy stuff like that, just watching fresh stuff. But I'm not going to sit down and watch the werewolves anymore. I'm not going to watch just stuff like I just find I'm not going to do it. I'm just not interested. So I'm just going to go back and watch because I think there's so much great stuff that I haven't seen rather than anticipating new stuff. Like Eggers was good, but aside from that, there's not much else I really want to watch aside from the big names that I'm looking forward to. So I've been watching a lot of Bogart stuff. Petrified Forest I really liked. The K-Mutineer, The Enforcer, they're good. I did watch a few. I haven't reviewed these just yet, but I've watched Tokyo Joe, which I thought was okay. Black Legion, which I don't know if you've heard about this. It's a Bogart 1937 Archie Mayo about a guy who works in a factory, goes for a job. He's meant to get it, buys all this shit, cars for his wife. He's not made much money, and they give it to a Polish immigrant worker. It was first generational immigrant, and in his hatred and in his pessimism, decides to join a American group of racists. It's Humphrey Bogart. This is a very subconscious watching this with what's happening now, but there's stuff that's happening literally right now as we speak. Rallies in America, which is genuinely frightening that they're going to get a generational influence on young people and think that's the way to live your life in just fear, terror, and racism. And for 1937, I thought it was incredibly profound, but I also think that the performance is excellent and Bogart's tremendous in it. And then I did watch. Sorry, just wait there a second. I did watch George A. Romero's Resident Evil documentary. I wouldn't bother. It's like a 20-minute YouTube documentary for an hour and 50 minutes. I could barely make it through. It's so prolonged. It's so like dull. It's interesting to a point. It's so fucking dull. But there's a few films I wanted to recommend to you as well. I actually, to be very brief, because Nick mentioned it a few episodes ago I was on, I thought, okay, I haven't watched Nosferatu. I thought, fuck it, I'll watch it. I watched Shadow of the Vampire, the sort of fake biopic documentation of Nosferatu with Max Schreck and Monroe. I liked it. I'm still formulating an opinion on it. I think it was interesting. I like how perplexed it was. I like how strange it was. I thought that was good, really good fun. I'm starting to get into February, which is Black History Month in the US. So I watched In Too Deep, which I enjoyed, and I just finished watching Belly last night, which I don't know. Have you ever seen Belly, the Hype Williams film? I've never seen a film that starts with such visualization. I'm like, this is amazing. Like this starts in a nightclub and it's all like infrared, so their eyes glow white. It's like a crime thriller. Just this gang who enters this nightclub to rob another gang, and their eyes change to white, and it's like the whole the faces change. It's so interesting how it uses lighting, and then slowly but surely for the first quarter, really interesting visually, like just cinematography, production design. Then the second quarter of it, or the second third of it's like, are we just going into like rudimentary, like we're just making a Training Day movie here? And then the last quarter is a Spike Lee movie. And Hype Williams has only made 2 films, this and a documentary on Beyonce 12 years ago. Fascinating filmmaker. I would watch it. It's such a strange film. Lovely looking, but it's and like how it use like black texture, black skin. Really interesting feature, but like just loses its way. But the last thing I wanted to touch on it, and this is what I wanted to recommend you. There's a film called Conflict with Humphrey Bogart, and I think it's directed by Curtis Bernhardt, who's like a filmmaker from the 30s and 40s and 50s. Very simplistic adventure. Humphrey Bogart's with his wife, and he just hates her, just doesn't want to be with her anymore, right? And he has a car accident, and it doesn't kill her. She escapes like scot free, right? And a sister who he fancies, who he wants to really be with, is in the back, and both of them are not injured. But he breaks his leg and his arm, and he has like this hatred in his hospital bed where like he decides, whatever happens now, I'm going to get rid of her. And one night, he gets rid of her. And from that moment on, like he's either his conscience or something is happening, and he keeps on seeing her. And then some certain things happen, and she might not be dead. It is a tremendous film in a sense of Bogart being able to play like someone who is a vile, yet like you can feel the terror and you can feel the sweat on the back of his brow. There are sequences in here at night shot on a background, right, where it just the moon's in the background and we're in a wooded area, and it's like being shot in a Universal Monsters movie that James Whale in the 30s, but it's him scuttling around, like trying to see if his wife's body's here and there. The use of lighting, the black and white, is so good. I couldn't believe, like it was like 1945. It looks tremendous. If anyone's out there, I think it's a Warner Brothers archive film. You'll be able to find it in the US. It was quite difficult to find in the UK. Watch it. It's Bogart. It's sensational in it, and it's 10 years before he died as well. It's very interesting. Another film I watched was The K Mutiny, which I didn't much enjoy, but I thought he was tremendous in it. But I'm going to watch a lot of Bogart this month. I've seen a lot of it. I'm doing Black History Month with a few features. I've got Pam Grier coming up, a little few features of her. I think she's honestly, she's gorgeous. Pam Grier in the 70s is like just genuinely tremendous. If we had a different culture in the US, I think she would have been huge. Like she's absolutely gorgeous, and they just forgot about her after the 70s. It's absolutely disgusting. I mean, like, honestly, absolutely gorgeous. And then I'm going to do Women's History Month on March. There's a lot of good stuff coming up, but watch Conflict. I'd love to know your opinion. But that's all I've seen. We've got some reviews for Clapper as well. I'm going to do The Companion and some horror movies and stuff. But yeah, I've just been watching some all good stuff. Are you going to do some Black History Month and Women's Month?
A little bit. I'm doing Women's Month. For February, I'm focusing more on previous Best Picture winners.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I'm definitely going to do some Black History Month here and there because I have a huge watch list to get through.
You've got a big month coming up because when Emilia Perez wins Best Picture, I don't know how I'm going to console you, but I'm not going to be able to do it, am I? Because it's going to happen. It's going to be that on Conclave, which I'm not really bothered about, but
I'm going to be cheering it on. What do you mean? What's not to like there? Carla, Sophia Gascon, my new favorite actress. Yeah. Come on.
She's just been everywhere lately. I don't know what about, but she's been absolutely everywhere. Yeah.
She loves to talk. I'll give you that.
Yeah. I wish she had more of a social media presence, don't you? I wish she would be a bit more vocal.
I try to follow her on Twitter and it's gone.
Yeah. So. That is strange. We'll have to look into that. But it's interesting when it wins Best Picture, how that's going to go, because I think this is... Not to get into a different conversation, but...
Have you seen it?
No, I'll tell you a secret, right? I desperately want to watch it with my wife, and she won't watch it. Because we have date night every Saturday, and last week she likes to watch crime movies, so I was like, well, watch The Boston Strangler, because Yaku gave it 4 stars. We should have read your review first, but I'll let that bygone be bygones, because it's like, Carson's right. I said, because I read the review halfway through the film, I was like, why are we watching that? I completely agree with everything he says, and it's true. And I read Jacob's. I was like, I don't know about that. I think he's on about the Richard Fleischer film in 1968. But anyway, we were going to watch Emilia Perez, but she will not do it. She won't. She's adamant she won't want to watch it. She says it'll ruin a week. Why does she want to put herself through it? I'm more open. I'd love to do a Clapper watch along with that. I'd love to, because because I haven't seen it. I'd love to watch it with you or Max Hans. I'll watch it with Jacob or Randy for the first time. We should do that. We should watch it the night before. The night before it went.
I'm down. I'll be free that night.
So next week or the week after, I'll be doing that. We'll have a very sorry podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you give 5 stars, haven't you? Is that?
Yeah, 6 actually.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Of course. You watched it twice, didn't you? Yeah, you have to get the extra star. And the like is obviously the 6 star. That goes a message.
Yeah. It's so funny, like, to imagine being a critic at Cannes and everyone is like, cinema. Perfect, great.
It's funny you mention that, because I remember when it played at a festival and people were like, there is a film coming out that is so transphobic, that is so xenophobic and stupid and silly, and nobody's talking about it. And then bang, that trailer came out, and people were like, it's this. And ever since then, it's just seemed to have grown. It's just flowered, hasn't it? It's gonna win. Maybe that's what we need.
I,
This is our Tokyo flooding in a way.
well,
We
this is how
need
we
the
get back at Trump.
Yes,
We put Amelia Perez out front and we
yes.
win.
And he'll have to screen it in the White House, and he'll if he's not. I may have got to be careful what I say. I was going to say something deflammatory there, but we've got to be careful. Maybe he'll watch it and maybe he'll ask some questions, and that's the worry, I suppose, more so. I mean, as an educational tool, how fucking dangerous is that film? Like, that's frightening.
Oh yeah.
Woo!
Cinema, modern cinema. Gotta
we'll
love it.
We'll leave that for
Yeah.
the watch along. We'll have we've had such a political discussion here. What's not
Right.
like for the next one on that?
Well, and if you are curious about our Amelia Perez opinions at home, we do have a full episode on it from last year, so would recommend that.
God.
Myself and Nicolo Grosso reviewed it back when we didn't know what it was about, but hey, you live, you learn. Next week, we'll be back on the Patreon to review To Sleep with Anger. The week after, probably Oz Perkins the Monkey, if it's available to watch easily. If not, might switch it up. And then, Women's History Month, a lot of fun stuff happening.
When have you started your Perkins watch along yet? Your filmography? Have you started that yet?
Already started, yeah.
Because you've seen Hansel and Gretel.
I've seen them all except for the Pretty Little Things in the House, whatever that one is. I've seen them all before. But I'm rewatching them all before The Monkey.
Yeah, okay. I'm very excited.
Great stuff, right? Like,
I can't wait.
Big Perkins fan. And if you did enjoy today's episode talking about anime, not to announce anything, but stay tuned in a few months because we will have a few more episodes at least talking about anime on the podcast in a few months. So we'll get there when we get there. Jack, where can we find you on social media?
You can find me on X and Alexa. You can find me on Twitter or X. I don't really post there. It's an absolute cesspit. I just send memes to Carson and we agree about certain things. You can find me on there if you want to, but primarily you can find me on Clapper with certain reviews and a few features every so often. And you can find me on Letterboxd where I'm doing Bogart, James Cagney, Black History Month, Women's History Month, I'd Lupino, getting just all those type of really good features out. I can't wait. We're going to have such a good year this year. And you can also listen to me on here every so often. Carson's very nice and invites me on, and we have these detailed, morbid chats about Japanese culture and westernized ideology. We've just elevated the material so far. But again, this is your birthday, Mum, so thank you very much for having me on. And a happy birthday as well. I hope you really enjoyed yourself.
Thank you. Yes, I had a great birthday week, so
I saw the cake that you were given. It was really sweet. I like that.
It was incredible. Yeah,
love that.
No, I was shocked. And you can find me on Blue Sky and Letterboxd, just Carson Timar, as well as Words, obviously, on Clapper, and I'm on ClapperCast every week or so. So definitely a lot of fun stuff happening. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.